Yo, what's up guys, I'm Dunmere. I'm a top 100 Overwatch and rank 3 Supervive player, and here I have a guide for you guys for Shrike that I've put together with my over 400 hours and 1.5 years of pre-alpha playtesting experience. So enjoy the video guys. Let's begin with Shrike's abilities. Shrike's primary fire charges up and shoots a powerful sniper shot. The shot deals 50% damage point blank, and scales up to full damage at half of her max range. Landing a shot with her primary or ultimate applies a mark of Shrike's passive ability that lingers for around 6 seconds. Hit an enemy again with either of Shrike's primary or ultimate, and the mark will be triggered for a huge burst of extra damage. Shrike's secondary fire is a lobbed grenade that explodes shortly after landing, dealing damage, knockback, and a mini stun to enemies caught in its radius. This ability can also be used on enemy wisps for knockback, and to make resurrections on them take longer. For Shrike's movement cooldown, she has a multi-use ability that launches her backward on use. This ability also ejects a projectile that slows and grounds any enemy she catches with it. Shrike's E ability is a Scout Ward. Upon activating the ability, it travels away from her, revealing and applying anti-heal to enemies it passes over. During travel, it can be reactivated to place a ward that gives vision of anything in a large circle around it. Shrike's ultimate sends out an armor bypassing shot that pierces through terrain and enemies. Let's move on and talk about Shrike's strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Shrike's first core strength is her very reliable combat output. She has excellent damage output overall and will two-shot the vast majority of characters and builds in Supervive. And in addition to this, her effective range is among the very best in the game, meaning she will win most range-based trades. Because of this, enemies are pressured into covering the distance against her, rather than her having to aggress into them. This gives Shrike a huge advantage that adds to her being a very powerful fighter. Yet even with such great range, she also has an excellent ability to pressure enemies through walls as both her ultimate and bomb go through them. This means that enemies often can't even rely on cover to protect them from her range. Despite being such a powerful fighter, her second core strength is that she's also very forgiving to misplays. While sniper type characters will often struggle if they make mistakes in other games, Shrike has both an area of effect stun that she can use to defend herself with, and also a low cooldown and long distance dash ability. If she makes a mistake, she'll often have either one of these forms of utility to protect herself with, either by stunning the enemy with the bomb or just dashing away from them. Shrike's third core strength is that she also offers the best information gathering ability in the game with her ward. This allows her to support her teammates also, and allows her to combo quite well with many characters in the roster. Yet despite having many powerful strengths, Shrike does have some weaknesses. The first of these is that her main source of damage is backweighted, as most of it is locked behind proccing her passive ability marks. This means that her damage isn't always as useful as it could be to her allies. Her first shots simply don't deal much damage, so if she isn't able to get another shot onto the marked enemy, she isn't really doing all that much. Yes, she still is applying pressure to them, but this doesn't mean much when trying to quickly focus fire on an enemy, or to catch one that's escaping. Shrike's second core weakness is that she can be quite weak in specific circumstances. The most obvious example of this is that Shrike's primary weapon damage simply is halved at close range, yet this damage also has a long windup that slows her down a lot, so Shrike is extra vulnerable fighting enemies close up. Of course, she has tools to get out of situations like this in her dash and bomb, but this isn't always possible in a battle royale situation, like when Shrike's team is being caught while coming in from the pressing circle. Shrike simply needs time to work with when engaged in a fight. This adds up to her third weakness. Shrike struggles to force fights. With the isometric camera angle and battle royale design, this game produces many situations where teams are forced to brawl in close range, whether it be one team trying to take away an island of safe ground, or escape the storm in an in-game circle. Shrike just won't offer much in a situation like this, so if she can't pressure enemies enough before this needs to happen, her team is likely to lose. Now that we have the specifics covered, how do you actually put this all together for a full playstyle of Shrike? The vast majority of Shrike's value roots through her primary fire. Hit most enemies twice and they will die, so simply enough, this is your most basic goal in Shrike. Yet Shrike is balanced by being one of the more range-dependent characters in the game. She does happen to have one of the longest effective ranges across the roster, but has a special damage debuff at close range, so while she has huge power, you need to keep her right within her ideal distance or she'll lose a bunch of value. This is where her other abilities come into play, as they offer aggressive utility to let her use her max range more efficiently, while also offering defensive utility to keep enemies from getting too close. So in this section, I'll quickly run through specifics on each ability, and the ways they can be used aggressively and defensively, and then explain how to choose the correct choice in any situation. Starting with Shrike's dash. This ability to reposition gives her an edge that is both aggressive and defensive. By saving the ability, Shrike can stretch beyond her normal positioning limitations for more aggressive off angles. If enemies threaten her, she can easily escape back to her team with a dash. Though Shrike's movement direction should always be prioritized when dashing, she can slightly deviate from the perfect location if it will let her hit the grounding projectile also, as this will give her a much higher chance of punishing the diving enemy after. On the other hand, if enemies don't even threaten her at all, she can just continue to just pump damage into them. And then as the fight continues, she can simply use the dash to chase down any enemies that attempt to escape, or just continue to save it defensively in case a third party shows up. As for Shrike's vision ward, there are multiple ways it can be used. Aggressively, it can be used to gain vision on a set of enemies that would normally be obscured from her. Shrike has two different forms of damage that bypass walls, so having vision on enemies means she can threaten them at the exact range she wants to be at. Otherwise, she'd have to rely on teammates or try to find the enemies herself, both of which can be quite risky. It's important to keep in mind that the vision ward can be destroyed by enemies though, so it needs to be placed in a location where enemies would have to take damage to get line of sight of it, or on top of it when using it aggressively. Defensively though, Shrike can use the ward to guard herself from awkward locations enemies could sneak up on her from. This way she'll have the warning she needs to escape from a flanker that shows up, or even potentially stop the flanker from trying to go for her in the first place because they know they'll be seen. There is a third use case from its anti-heal capability, but this is the least consistent use, so it's usually not the best. Moving on to Shrike's Bomb, this ability has the most diversity of capabilities, partly because of its huge amount of offensive uses. It can be used to knock enemies out from behind cover, to chunk a group of stacked up enemies, to stop an enemy from easily rezzing their knocked ally's wisp, or most simply as an extra bit of damage on something like a Celeste exiting her ultimate. Yet this doesn't mean it's a weak defensive tool either, as it can be tossed at Shrike speed to counter an enemy diver, or to stop a situation like a Kingpin trying to finish his slam combo after he hooks Shrike ally, or even after he hooks Shrike herself. If used well enough, it can even be used to cancel enemy ultimates. And for Shrike's ultimate, it is the simplest of all the abilities, as it can be used aggressively to finish a marked target through walls and at massive range, also letting her defensively stay behind those walls. This will give her a huge advantage in not having to chase to finish enemies, though she'll usually be saved for this. With the specifics covered, let's talk about how this can all be applied together into a full playstyle. To answer this, I'll need to discuss how Shrike should play in general, and then discuss how to decide when to use each ability defensively and aggressively. I'll start with the first of these points, and then go into the second one after. So, how should you usually play Shrike? You should play Shrike to this general playstyle. Take a slight off angle where Shrike can hit enemies near her max range, and stay outside of the enemy's max range. From there, Shrike can primary fire any enemies that are in the open, while carefully making sure to reposition depending on how they move. If they push into her, back up. If they back up, take more space into them. Otherwise, if they get too close, you risk being caught in their damage and stuns. Or if they get too far, your shots won't be able to hit the enemy. Instead, you always want to be at the sweet spot within Shrike's range and outside of theirs. However, enemies will usually not just stand in the open, but will hide behind cover instead, making it harder to get value on enemies from range. So here's how you should play Shrike if in this situation. Your first thought should be to position on a more aggressive off angle or flank to bypass the cover the enemies are using. This will net you the most value, and is something you should always do, but it has a limitation. I'll explain more in the next part of this section, but try to stick to the general rule that you shouldn't go beyond 1.5 Shrike dash distances from your allies, or they won't be able to help you if you get jumped on and try to escape. However, if you are playing aggressively enough on Shrike, enemies will just be forced to enter your sidelines or that of your enemies. But if you can't safely flank more aggressively and the enemy is still able to use cover, this is where Shrike's abilities will shine. Start by using Shrike's ward outside of where the enemy are so that you can see them. Then you can force them out with Bird Bomb by tossing at enemies who are standing on corners. If you position it correctly, they'll often be forced to just walk into the open to avoid it, or simply be knocked out into the open. Some characters can dash away from your bomb into safety, but most will usually be forced out and be vulnerable to a primary fire shot. The enemy may often be killed during this if you communicate your bomb to your team before you use it, but if not, they'll still be damaged and marked. From here, you can look for a finishing shot with Shrike's ultimate, as it also triggers Shrike's passive mark. If you still haven't killed anybody after this, you should continue to re-distance yourself according to how the enemy is moving, and just wait to get your bird bomb back. Regardless, you should always save your dash for an unexpected situation, like if you misposition and get jumped onto, or a third party shows up. Holding onto this ability allows you to position super aggressively since it can save you from a mistake. But without it, you can't safely play like that, and therefore can't get good angles on the enemy. All in all, this is the general way that Shrike should be played, but is not the exact way that most fights will go or how they should be played. Which leads us into the second question. How do you decide when to use each ability aggressively or defensively? The answer to this depends on what kind of enemies you're fighting against. More specifically, it mostly depends on how many highly mobile and flanking characters the enemy has. The more they have, the more you need to use your abilities defensively. This game is a battle royale, and every character has a mobility option, so you should of course save your dash in any fight situation. Yet when the enemy has highly mobile characters or flankers, things get even more complicated than that. A highly mobile character is dangerous since they can often jump you from outside your effective range, but you can still sometimes play aggressively against them if they've lost some HP. This doesn't just mean you have to be constantly in fear of them or something, as you can sometimes still play aggressively against them if they've lost some HP, are standing in open space, or just have used a lot of their abilities. But the biggest risk is if you don't know where they are, as they become significantly more powerful like this. And this means you need to save more of your utility to defend yourself and your allies. So because of this danger, this all means that your priority as Shrike should always be to scout all enemies when you see part of an enemy team. If you don't see all 4 of them, then your best bet is to play Shrike's ward defensively to protect from the side where flankers will probably want to go. This will give you some leeway to make further decisions about how aggressively you position, and how aggressively you can use your bird bomb. Once you've figured out what the enemy has, if you're playing against just one highly mobile character, then the ward will often be enough to keep them away or let you hit them with a sniper shot as they try to aggress. This means you're free to position aggressively and use your bomb aggressively too. If you're playing against 2 or so highly mobile enemies though, or you don't know where a flanker is, you should save your bomb for defensive use, but you can still position pretty aggressively. Flankers will have to get on top of you to get value at some point, so they're basically guaranteed to be vulnerable to a bird bomb placed directly at your own feet, or where they're going to dive to. This all works on a sort of sliding scale, where the more highly mobile threats there are and the more they're hidden from you, the more Shrike needs to play defensively. The scale goes something like this. No threat from flankers or hidden enemies, use all abilities except dash aggressively. A bit of threat, use ward defensively while still positioning aggressively on flank and using bird bomb aggressively too. A lot of threat, use ward and bird bomb defensively while also positioning quite defensively too. This all works to Shrike's most core goal of having the most time where she can click on enemies. When not threatened, you need to just walk up and click on whoever you can see. When heavily threatened, you need to wait to survive the enemy dive, so that you then have the opportunity to click on them after when they are low resources. So analyze your threat level and then pick the correct response according to this, and you will find great success on Shrike.